After a long time we are meeting. We used to have earlier a lot of lectures. When he came, I told him I am willing any kind of interaction. And when he told me that he wants CAE, I said I think for general practitioner, testing is common things which are so important. So first thing that I told is we will do interpretation of lever function test. This is a very common investigation that we ask for, and there are so many. I find so many flaws while interpreting. So I thought it is better that we go to the basics and clarify those issues. And then we go ahead. And I have already told Sachin anytime, any topics. After this, Dr. Reddy asked me to talk on hepatitis B, approach to hepatitis B. If we finish this, we will address that issue slightly, but I think that itself is a new complete topic which will take probably 1 hour to discuss. So we will take this in the next setting. What do we know about liver function? See, my topics are generally more two-way rather than one-way. I would like you to also interact with me. Yeah, what actually you mean by liver function? It is actually biochemical and functional test of liver. So what 9% of normal people will have abnormal enzymes. Can anybody define normal? We always get a range, no? Yes. 10 to 15, 15 to 20. Why you get this range of normal? Have you ever thought?
The range has been decided by doing a study in particular population, and then it has been defined.
You are right, but the extension of the scientific extension is like this. When there are 100 people in one town and everybody's hemoglobin is tested and they are plotted on a graph. All that falls in the first 2 standard deviation is considered as normal. That does not mean that somebody outside that or below that may be abnormal. Okay, so the definition of normal is measurement in the first 2 standard deviation. So that's why you will not have a straight figure as normal. It will keep changing depending upon the time period as well as the kind of population that you are dealing with. So when it comes to liver function test, we only know a few tests that will help us to determine. But I can tell you that these are suboptimal tests actually determine the true liver function. That's why when we do liver transplant, besides LFT, you have what we call as MED score, Mayo End Stage Liver Disease score. On the basis of MED score only, patients are listed for transplant. Secondly, you do volumetry to look at the volume, you look at the fat content of the liver, you look at the vasculature of the liver when you are doing transplant. So, when it comes to common liver function test per se, what we actually do, we are trying to do the biochemical and the functional test of the liver. What we commonly do are bilirubin, SGOT, SGPT, albumin, alkaline phosphatase, prothrombin. So you have synthetic functions of the liver and you have enzyme functions of the liver. What is called as biochemical or other functions. So LFT is imprecise as many of the tests are poor indicator of the liver biochemical function. You may have a normal LFT. I'll tell you, alcoholic liver disease, SGPT may be 25 and he may be having a very severe alcoholic hepatitis. Because in alcoholic liver disease, SGPT is not formed because of the acetaldehyde secondary to alcohol kills the SGPT SGPT enzymes. So there is a severe damage to the liver cells, but SGPT will always remain normal. So that's how you diagnose alcoholic hepatitis, where your SGOT upon SGPT ratio is more than 2. Normally, the enzymes go hand in hand. SGOT, SGPT in a liver disease will go high together. But in certain conditions, SGOT will be higher than SGPT. Another example is any hemolytic disease. Any hemolytic disease. Third example is we always do old days when we used to have heart attack, we used to do SGPT. PROP-T and CPT-MP came quite late, 90s. Before that we used to do only SGOT. Any muscle injury will also cause rise in SGOT. So SGOT is a non-specific test. It is not very sensitive, not very specific. It is a sensitive test, but it is not a specific test. So, next. So common liver function tests that we commonly do are bilirubin, which measures the ability to detoxify metabolites and transport organic ions into the body. Single statement giving lot of information. Can anybody tell you where does the bilirubin come from? What is the source? See, liver takes up so many things, but actually the source of bilirubin is predominantly hemoglobin. The RBC's life is 120 days. Every 120 days, new cells are forming, new RBCs are forming. Where is the old going? They are getting metabolized by the liver. Heme and globin. Heme goes into the liver, globin goes into the circulation. Heme is converted by multiple metabolic products into bilirubin. And this is done in the liver. This bilirubin gets conjugated to an enzyme called glucuronidase transferase, and then it is excreted into the circulation. Whenever there is any injury or defect in the whole process in the formation from heme to bilirubin and the transport, you will get abnormal bilirubin. Simple example is uridyl transphosphorase enzyme deficiency leading to indirect bilirubin rise in the blood circulation, causing indirect hyperbilirubinemia with a normal liver enzyme, Gilbert syndrome. So you have people with bilirubin of 3, 4, 5, indirect bilirubin high, SGOT persistently normal. Patient has got normal hemoglobin without any hemolysis. This patient is a Gilbert syndrome. How will you confirm that this is nothing else? Simple. Starve this patient 400 calorie diet for 2 days. And you see the bilirubin will rise to 600. You feed him, next day his bilirubin will come down. So, Gilbert syndrome patients, if they are starving, if they are under stress, if they have fever, or any other stressful situation, the bilirubin will rise. But always ensure that you just don't do bilirubin, you always do liver enzymes also. Because if SGPT is high, it may not be Gilbert syndrome. Now there are patients of Gilbert syndrome who can develop hepatitis, who can develop sepsis. So if a Gilbert diagnosed patient comes with rise SGPT and bilirubin, it may be he is suffering some other illness besides Gilbert syndrome. These are complex things. You don't have to worry about that. But for a case, I see so many times patients have 5 वर्षापासून jaundice है, 1.8, 2.3, only bilirubin has been done. Indirect is sometimes high, direct is sometimes high, and SGPT is not done. You don't know what it is. He is healthy. There are no other problems. You don't know how to diagnose this. And a weakness what for? This is jaundice. Every time he feels weak, he takes a bilirubin 1.8 or 2.8. You have got jaundice. Take rest. You will be fine. He takes rest. He sleeps. He eats well. His bilirubin goes down. He's actually Gilbert. But he is going through other stressful situations. That's why he lands up that way. So when you do bilirubin, you should do complete liver function test. Don't just ask for only bilirubin because that may misguide you. Enzymes will detect damage to liver or biliary obstruction. Albumin and prothrombin times will reflect liver synthetic function. Okay, now liver enzymes, serum aminotransferases, what we used to call SGOT or ALT and AST. ALT is SGPT and AST is SGOT. Alkaline phosphatase, gamma transpeptidase and 5-nucleotide. These are the common enzymes that we check in patients of liver disease or whenever you want to check liver function test. All these enzymes determine either by a hepatocellular or biliary ductular injury. Alkaline phosphatase, gamma GT and 5-nucleotidase will determine if there is any biliary canalicular injury or not. Now these are the reference range. This is only everybody would know what is the reference range. These ranges are changing by 10 decades, 2 decades, 3 decades every time. As the population changes, the reference range is changing. Of course, to your notice here, we have written SGOT, SGPT around 55 and 30 here. But for our definition in India, the normal SGPT for a male is 33 maximum and for a female is 90 on 9. So if you have 2 times above normal, say if you have 66 or 45 in a female, that means this patient has got a hepatitis. It may be chronic, it may be acute, depending upon the temporal profile. Acute hepatitis, SGPT requires at least 10 times above normal. Chronic hepatitis, anything about 2 times to 5 times. And they minus the indirect. True indirect bilirubin is not checked. Okay, so that's why you get so many times flawed result. What is direct and indirect? Direct is the bilirubin which is conjugated with the protein, that is direct bilirubin, and bilirubin that is not conjugated with protein is indirect. What is delta bilirubin? Can you explain a patient SGOT-PT after acute hepatitis has become normal, but the bilirubin remains high for 2 to 3 weeks? This happens so many times. You see, patients acute hepatitis, initially the bilirubin increases, SGOT-PT increases, SGOT-PT starts coming down, bilirubin continues to increase, there is a lag phase, and then SGOT-PT comes down and the bilirubin does not just come down for 2 to 3 weeks. Why does this happen?
Cholestasis.
No, cholestasis is the cause. Is the cause. What you are checking is bilirubin in the blood. The injury has settled, but when you know that SGOT, SGPT has come back to normal, that means your injury has come back to normal. So liver is now become normal, but your bilirubin still remains high because of what we call as delta bilirubin. This is because the bilirubin which is attached to albumin will take 3 weeks because albumin's half-life is 20 days. So this bilirubin is not excreted through the urine or into the circulation or in the fecal circulation because the albumin's half-life is more than 20 days. So this delta bilirubin is responsible for the pigmentation continuing despite everything coming normal. So you are able to explain this phenomena by what we call as delta bilirubin. This is only for information sake. Now When we are talking about direct and indirect, what do you have to know about direct and indirect? Indirect bilirubin will increase in what conditions? And direct bilirubin will increase in what conditions? Indirect bilirubin will increase in condition whenever there is excess load, so whenever there is hemolysis. Any kind of hemolysis, when blood loss occurs, blood damage occurs, hemolysis occurs, bilirubin, indirect bilirubin will rise. What is the cutoff at which when you say that this is definite hemolysis or this is indirect bilirubin secondary to hemolysis and this is not hemolysis? Suppose I will give you an example. The bilirubin is 5, indirect is 2.5, direct is 2.5. What do you call it? This is hepatocellular mixed. If the bilirubin is 5, indirect is 4 and direct is 1. This is definitely indirect. So the cutoff, scientific cutoff is 80% of bilirubin. If it is indirect, then it is hemolysis. 80% of the total, 80. Anything below that is considered mixed or hepatocellular. You may have some hemolysis along with hepatocellular injury where you may have 60% of bilirubin which is indirect and 40% is direct. So this picture you will have. See, these are definite criteria. You will always see grey areas where you have to look at the clinical condition before you decide what is right and what is wrong. So this is what I wanted to talk when I was showing this reference range. Any question on this? Because I will not go unless we are clear about these basic things. Now aminotransferases, I always said these vary.
One question.
Yes.
As a hepatic cellular injury, how to better after injury, particularly if hepatitis are made, so number of days to complete better.
So that will depend. That will rest. No? What you are trying to say. That will depend upon condition of the patient and how bad is the level. I have treated bilirubin of 65 at home without admitting the patient. So it will depend upon the exact cause of the disease, at what stage you are seeing, and what is the underlying condition of the patient, what are the comorbid conditions. In a young 20-year-old male, acute hepatitis, bilirubin of 6, SGOT-PT coming back to normal, in 15 days he will be fine. But an old man with diabetes, hypertension, hypothyroidism, kidney disease, with acute hepatitis, bilirubin of 6, SGOT-PT of this may take 2 months to recover. So this criteria, how much today, it will depend upon individual case.
डे बाय डे जर्नी का सब 3 दिन में उनको काम पे जाना
नहीं वो तो that is, these questions are going to come to you, sir. These questions are there.
how to advise the person
नहीं, let him become all right. जब तक आपका बिल्कुल legally मैं आपको सर्टिफिकेट नहीं दे सकता. This is what I always tell. You are fit. मैं घर पे बोर हो जाता हूँ सर, मेरे को अभी कंटाला आ रहा है, मेरे को ऑफिस जाना है. जाओ ना तुम. हमारा बिल्कुल नॉर्मल नहीं होगा, SGOT-PT नॉर्मल नहीं होगा. I will not allow you to go. मैं सर्टिफिकेट नहीं दूँगा. आप जाके काम कर सकते हैं. But I cannot legally give you certificate. I know I sympathize with you, but लेकिन मैं legally नहीं दे सकता. Because we have seen in hepatitis A and E, now we are seeing a double peak phenomenon, where the SGOT-PT is increasing, coming back, and in few days later, once again it is rising. So this may go on up to 6 months. You cannot predict which patient will get this. There are no predictors for this. So advice will be scientific, not what patient wants. So coming back to aminotransferases, aminotransferases are enzymes which are secreted when there is liver injury. These enzymes will determine the amount of hepatocellular injury. SGOT, SGPT will depend, normal will depend with the age, gender and the body adiposity. This is becoming a major challenge, body adiposity, fatty liver disease. Fat in the body is increasing day by day, even in thin patients, and it's a different chapter. We will discuss fatty liver disease someday because it's a complete 1 hour lecture that we will take. Sensitivity and specificity will depend upon the cutoff. As I gave you the cutoff for men and women, men it is 33 and women it is 19. 2 times above normal, more than 6 months is chronic hepatitis. What happens with most of the doctors is that today he has shown to him and the patient's SGPT is 90. He will say, and bilirubin is 1.8. He will say this is jaundice. Okay? The patient goes back after 1 month to some other doctor where the enzymes are normal. Now you are better. See, वो 1.8 का 1 हो गया, but SGPT has become 65 from 90. And 2 months later, he goes to third one, where it will be 2.8 or 2 with SGPT remaining 90 or 100, and वापस बढ़ गया. Is how will you tell this patient what he is undergoing? This may be a normal variation. Also, as I said, 9% of patients will fall into a normal category, where even if their enzymes and these things are not abnormal. So, how will you advise this patient? What I do is, if there are high risks, what are the risks? Diabetic, alcohol, hypertension, hypothyroidism, because hypothyroidism itself can cause increase in SGPT. Hyperthyroidism can cause abnormal liver. Patients who are taking some drugs. These patients I will investigate. How much to investigate will depend upon the risk factor of the patient and how anxious he is. Most of the time, if you have examined and there is no hepatomegaly and there are no risk factors, reassure him. But in your mind, keep a check. 6 months later, you repeat your LFT and come back. If a 25-year-old man with 2 readings apart, 6 months apart, of more than 2 times above normal SGPT, I would like to investigate. And then what will be the investigations? If he is obese or he is overweight, then I first do lipid profile and do his ultrasound. If there is fatty liver disease, I will advise him that he should start reducing weight, rather than immediately going ahead with all detailed investigation. You should always do HPSAG and anti-HCV, because virus will never have any signs symptoms. So you do HPSAG and anti-HCV, and you do lipid profile. Ask any young patient to do an ultrasound. If there is fatty liver, tell him to reduce weight. Don't scare him. Just keep a watch and ask for investigation. If the same patient is 65-year-old man, diabetes, hypertension, so many other, taking alcohol also, and he's got a firm hepatomegaly, then I will investigate in detail. First thing that I will do is complete blood count. I will get one ultrasound to look for cirrhosis. What are the features of chronic liver disease in complete blood count? You will start seeing total counts coming low. Platelets will be low normal. If the platelets are 1,75,000, for us it is normal. But for a person who you are suspecting a chronic liver disease, this may be cirrhosis. Why does this happen? We call it hypersplenism. What is hypersplenism? Secondary to fibrosis of the liver. So these are indirect markers of fibrosis of the liver, whatever is there here. So if a platelet count is low normal, if counts are low and enzymes are high and there is a firm hepatomegaly, I think old man needs to be investigated in detail. So these investigations, depending upon the SGOT, HGPT, will depend upon the case, the patient, the risk factors, the morbidity, medication that is taking, and Then, otherwise, there are no blanket investigations for every patient. Alkaline phosphatase, another enzyme. It is coming from liver and bone. How will you determine if the alkaline phosphatase is 905 in a patient of 45 years of age? How will you say that this patient has got liver disease or bone disease? If there are no risk factor for liver, SGOT, SGPT is normal, bilirubin, albumin is normal, complete blood count is normal, and alphos is slightly high, think of bone as the cause. What enzyme will determine that this alkaline phosphatase has come from liver or bone? Gamma GT or 5-nucleotidase. 5-nucleotidase or gamma GT. If gamma GT is high, you know this has come from the liver. So this alphos is an indicator of biliary injury, biliary canalicular injury, not from the bone. Why I ask you 45-year-old male with alphos rise is an early indicator for multiple myeloma. Where you have a slightly high gamma globulins and alkaline phosphatase is high, you have to have a suspicion, only then you will be able to make that diagnosis. I am just giving a passing reference. Every patient need not be thought of in that way. Only there is a clinical profile that determines that you should think of it as a differential diagnosis. Now, what are the other causes of increase third trimester of pregnancy? You will see all kids with alphos are very high. Infancy, people with blood group O and B, and even after a big fatty meal. Alkaline phosphatase increases with age. They are maybe 50% higher in female other than 30 years. So you have to know what age and what indication you are asking for alphos. If alphos was high, I would always do a gamma GT. Actually, there is a machine called SMA12 with pathologists, which actually does all liver function. Bilirubin, SGOT, SGPT, alphos, gamma GT, 5-nucleotidase, albumin, protein. So, if you see most of the time in Bombay Hospital earlier, we used to do an SMA12 plus 2. SMA12 was doing completely 2 was doing albumin and protein. So, SMA12 plus 2 was complete albumin. So gamma GT is found in hepatocytes, biliary cells, in the kidneys, seminal vesicles, pancreas, spleen, heart and brain. So you understand, gamma GT high does not necessarily mean liver, but predominantly biliary epithelial cells. But other conditions also can cause a rise in gamma GT. It is high up to infancy. It is a marker of cholestasis. Same with 5-nucleotidase. It is coming from liver, brain, intestine, heart, blood vessels, endocrine pancreas. Most of the time it is released into the blood by hepatobiliary tissue. It is also a measure of cholestasis. Test of synthetic function, serum albumin and prothrombin time. These are very poor markers of synthetic function because by the time albumin goes down, a lot of liver is damaged. By the time prothrombin time becomes very high, already too much damage has been done. But indocyanine green excretion test or other tests of liver disease or liver synthetic functions are very cumbersome, very difficult to do. They are only for research labs. But albumin remains a major synthetic function test. Most important for everybody is these tests have to be done in a standardized pattern, not manually earlier that we used to do dizo reagent was added as a direct was calculator and indirect was minus from the total bill. So I don't think so now that time is gone. We need to have very sensitive and specific tests by good automated machines which will, where you don't have to touch the bilirubin, the serum is picked up and automatically these things are done. So one criteria is it has to come from a reliable lab. So whenever you get an abnormal liver function test, how are you going to approach a patient? Because most of the time I see the family physician always asks for bilirubin. And the bilirubin comes 1.8, direct is 0.9, indirect is 0.9. That's it. Basically is not done, SGOT is not done, you don't know what it is on the patient. And patient has come with say either fever, weakness or whatever. And this patient is labeled tomorrow card. I as family physician I would say at least do SGOT, SGPT bilirubin. Don't stop at only bilirubin because no information is lost. Even you will be at a loss how to explain all this. Suppose at day one, because you are the first person to interact with the patient. Suppose it is acute hepatitis and 2 days you are examined, there is no jaundice. Third day what happened? First day nausea, vomiting, fever, acute hepatitis. When you come with fever, body ache, there is no jaundice, you will give it whatever medication. Third day you will ask for a test. If that time SGPT is just say 50, 60 or 70 and bilirubin is 1.8, it may be just beginning of acute hepatitis. Your other GP after 3 days may find SGPT of 2000 and bilirubin of 4. Don't do the blame game. Because by the time patient comes to me, the whole disease is very apparent. The first general practitioner is also right, the second is also right, and now they are. So the disease has to be seen not at that point of time. It has to be seen in the whole temporal profile of the illness. If the patient is coming to me on day 15 of his illness, the whole disease is blown up. If the patient comes to you day 2, your whole picture is not clear to you. So probably I am the lucky one because everything is ready on a pattern and usually you have to ask what is the cause and ask for it. Always, I think, since you people interact with patient more, you need to spend more time with the patient. That it can still be hepatitis. You just give time, wait for a few days, take paracetamol or if you feel it is malaria, you give antibiotics, anti-malaria, all that back, ask for an acute hepatitis. So history of alcohol, I ask for drugs, food and viral hepatitis. I am a part of National Drug-Induced Liver Disease Registry. After Europe, India has now in 2 years' time got the maximum number of drug-induced liver disease registry. We are sending samples to US for checking. I had one patient who had taken one CADA for constipation and developed drug-induced liver disease. I have just sent that sample. Was gone to US for testing. So what I am trying to say is whenever you see jaundice, drugs are very, very important. I am telling you Monosef is a drug which is used so commonly. It is responsible for so many gallbladder stones. If you give Monosef to a patient for 14 days, say one practitioner has given Monosef, 4 days later another has given Monosef, 8 days later, consultant is admitted and given the same Monosef. 15 days later, he may get rid of everything, but come back with gallstone. Cholestatic liver disease after drugs is very common. Steroids are known to cause drug-induced liver disease. Diclofenac known to cause renal disease, but is also known to cause liver disease. Diclofenac is known to cause severe pancreatitis. So drugs, whenever you interact with patient, keep drugs as one cause for whatever is illness. Whatever. It is very common. Anticox, see, our drug-induced liver disease registry has got the maximum number because of AKT. We have so much of tuberculosis that even if you consider 5-10%, it becomes huge number of patients. Unfortunately, all are not recorded. You also see, I also see, he also sees, but nothing is recorded. Most of them improve. Eventually improve and go, but then these records are not there as a database. That's why problem is in tuberculosis today there is no development of new drugs. Because you are happy with what is happening. Only when there is a hoo-ha created about XDR and XXDR tuberculosis, then somebody thinks of investigating new drugs. Industry is interested in profit. No company is willing to put money into one. Why there is not much research in malaria? It's a disease of fever. That's why America is not interested in finding new drugs for this. Because there is no money. Today industry is only interested only when there is return. See why hepatitis C drugs are so expensive. $1,000 for a tablet. While it is available for 14,000 rupees a month. Where it is 65,000 rupees per tablet in the US. It is all question of economics. Because US FDA is so strict, out of 100 drugs which are under investigation, probably even one will only see market. So it takes $8 billion for one drug to come into the market. $8 billion. So industry will come out with research and new products only when there is money. So what I would here insist, use your drugs judiciously. For fever, give paracetamol. Don't start day one with antibiotics. Yesterday you might have read Times of India that government is going to now curb the use of antibiotics. In UK, if I go as a doctor and I give you one, I share one example. One of my friend's daughter had urinary tract infection, prophylaxis. They went to the pharmacy. Pharmacist did not give. For urinary tract infection, the protocol is different. Give evidence why have you given ciprofloxacin. The pharmacist refused to give. Because in US and UK, pharmacists are general practitioners. They have their clinics where patients go, they consult and common tablets are given. So this should be followed even in our country, because in next 5 years time lot of patients will die because of resistant infections. We are seeing already in ICUs, we are seeing. Same is happening with diarrhea. You see so many antibiotic associated diarrhea. Clostridium infections are increasing and you started talking about fecal transplant. Already I have done 2 patients of fecal transplant. Severe Clostridium infection from locally patients. Not responding to vancomycin, metronidazole, clindamycin. I had to send them to Hinduja where they are doing fecal transplant. One of them improved, the other is still bad. So what I am trying to give a message here is it is a very serious issue of use of antibiotics, and they are also responsible for so many diseases like drug-induced liver disease is very, very common. Eptoin, you know, all anti-epileptic drugs are known to be hepatotoxic. AKT is known to be hepatotoxic. Painkillers, one has to be very, very careful. Now, how will you define what is standard alcohol content? Significant alcohol consumption, I would say, is 40 grams per day for more than 5 years consecutively is significant alcohol consumption. And alcohol is determined by not by the quality, by the exact quantity. So, when I say 40 grams, it means 40 grams. Beer has got 18%, so if you take 1 liter of beer, you get 18 grams. If you take 60 ml of whiskey, you will get only say 40, 20, 25 grams, because say whiskey is highest I think is 40% with vodka. 35%, 30 to 40% is whiskey. Vodka is 40%. So it is actually the volume rather than the quality of alcohol that will determine the severity of liver disease. And it is 50% less in women. Food, yes, Chinese. The chemical sodium metabyte sulfate and the Chinese sauce are known to be hepatotoxic. I tell you, lot of patients take Chinese in the night, in 6 hours to 12 hours time they get vomiting and loose motion and they come to you. Most of the time you see. Why that happens is the process of doing Chinese. It's called flash frying. You see, Chinese people, the rice is already pre-cooked. It's made a heat. They just remove some part of the rice and they flash fry. They fry the rice and give it. This is the process in which Bacillus cereus spores germinate. So what you get is Bacillus dysentery or gastroenteritis, which is most of the time self-limiting. You just have to hydrate them. 24 hours these will settle down. This may not go beyond 24 hours. You just have to maintain hydration. So if it happens 6 to 12 hours after Chinese, then you should suspect Bacillus and they will settle down in 12 to 24 hours, maximum 48 hours. Ensure hydration, don't give them antibiotics. Unfortunately, today every patient is in a hurry to become well because they don't want job loss or something. They have to understand that doing something in the short term is harming them in the long term. And we doctors only should do this because they are uneducated. We only train them to think, when it is required, do it. When it is not required, counsel them. It is not required. It is not required. Because ultimately we are going to face trouble. Same patient and our own human community is going to face trouble with drugs, antibiotics, difficulty in finding medications to treat common illnesses. So initial evaluation I have already mentioned. I think physical examination, what are the common things that you will see in patients of liver disease? When it is full blown, you know, the palmar erythema in alcoholic patient, you have spider erythema, you have tuberous contacts, you have flaps, clubbing of nails, gynecomastia, caput medusae. What is caput medusae? Dilated veins on the abdomen. Around the umbilicus there will be veins. Our time when ultrasound was not available, the ultrasound came in 1992 to San Francisco. We used to see the flow of the vein and determine whether this is total hypertension or whether this is superior inner cava obstruction or IVC obstruction. By just seeing the flow of veins. Parotid gland swelling, all this is because of poor oral hygiene. Testicular atrophy in patients of alcoholic hepatitis. When you have raised JVP, you know there is heart failure. You always see. A right-sided effusion in a patient of liver disease, suspect hepatic, what we call as hepatic hydrochlorides. There are trans-diaphragmatic channels allowing the ascites to come into the liver. And that's why patient of ascites suddenly feels good, all ascites has disappeared and then he starts becoming breathless and you realize that there is a right complete effusion. All the ascites has gone to the chest. This patient you should tap ascites rather than tapping pleural effusion. Pleural effusion should be tapped only to reduce his breathlessness. Keep tapping the ascites, otherwise you will land up with trouble. If you put in a tube here, they will never come out. Because there is continuously happening. These patients, it's a very difficult to treat condition. These patients require TIPS, transtubular portosystemic shunt. Only then these kind of ascites and positions, etc. Neurological signs you have already seen. Then there is full blown. In Wilson's disease, secondary Wilson's disease, liver disease, you will not have neurologic signs. In neurologic disease, you will not have liver disease. So Wilson's disease presentation is different. Either they will present with chorea and convulsions, or they will present with liver disease. They don't have both together. Why we don't know, but there are HLA variations which determine what will present first. So Wilson's disease is something. Another thing that now is coming into this is celiac disease. Yesterday I saw one patient from Lakshmi Hospital, young girl, presented with, earlier she had come to me 1 year back for some diarrhea and I had asked them to do some tests, they never came back. She's come out with cirrhosis. 18-year-old girl, liver is formed with nodules in the liver. Her IgA TTG is positive, she's got small varices, duodenum is flat, complete atrophy of the line, and patient has developed cirrhosis. So celiac disease, wheat or gluten sensitivity is the cause for chronic liver disease. Is the cause for cirrhosis. So celiac disease also should be suspected whenever you see in child failure to thrive or anemia. In adult, anemia, osteoporosis, chronic diarrhea, iron deficiency anemia, chronic diarrhea, early osteoporosis, or chronic liver disease, you should suspect celiac. I have got at least 15 patients of celiac, all adult. The oldest diagnosed at the age of 60 years. So it is not necessarily that it is from birth that they will develop. People can develop celiac disease even at 30, 40, 45, 50 and 60. So you should have a high index of suspicion when you are seeing a patient of say chronic liver disease, iron deficiency anemia or chronic diarrhea. Diagnostic test for celiac disease is biopsy from the third part or second part of duodenum, jejunal biopsy, and serological test of anti-endomycin antibodies or IgA tissue transglutaminase, antibodies to tissue transglutaminase, IgA TTG. These are the two tests. If they are high, you are. Now there is a condition called as non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Means I have patients who have got mild atrophy, their serology is negative. You have to restrict gluten and these patients are better. So patients who come to me with diarrhea, see for me, diarrhea protocol is if all other investigations are normal, I do upper GI endoscopy, I take a biopsy from the duodenum, I do colonoscopy, I take a biopsy from terminal line. Because as of now, our patients can't afford capsular endoscopy, so we are not doing small bowel studies. So these are the good mirrors of understanding small bowel. So as a protocol for any chronic diarrhea, you do biopsies from IM as well as from the jejunum. That will help us know what is happening. Now, what are the different patterns of abnormal liver function test? What we call as cholestatic pattern, hepatocellular pattern, hemolytic pattern. So I already talked to you about isolated hyperbilirubinemia. Isolated could be direct or indirect, where enzymes are normal and hemoglobin is normal. Indirect hyperbilirubinemia, there are only two, Gilbert syndrome, and if there are direct, then there is Stevens-Johnson or Rotar. Okay. Rotar is not seen in adult because type 1 Rotar patient will die as early as few days of life. Stevens-Johnson is direct hyperbilirubinemia. It is uncommon. I have few 5-6 patients who have direct hyperbilirubinemia but normal liver enzymes. When you consider hepatocellular, you will have SGOT, SGPT, bilirubin all increase. It may be various proportion. In alcoholic liver disease, SGOT is higher than SGPT. Other conditions where you have SGOT higher than SGPT is non-alcoholic fatty hepatitis, fatty liver of pregnancy. Cholestatic pattern when you have very high alkaline phosphatase. What are the conditions? Either you or extrahepatic cholestasis. Extrahepatic cholestasis is very common. You do an ultrasound, CVD is obstructed, ISBR is dilated, either there is a stone or there is a malignancy at the ampulla, in the head of the pancreas, or in the gallbladder, or in the common bile duct, or at the porta. So if you have obstruction anywhere in this system, you know extrahepatic obstruction leading to increased alkaline phosphatase and bilirubin. But when it comes to intrahepatic cholestasis, you may have increased bilirubin, you may have itching, you may not have CBD dilated, you may not see. I see so many times consultants investigate to an extent of doing CT scan and MRCP, and this, all that comes normal because they strongly suspect obstruction. When you strongly suspect, but even if there are no features of obstruction, except for rise in alphas and direct hyperbilirubinemia and enzymes, a lot of people ask for ruling out extrahepatic obstruction. But it could be intrahepatic obstruction, what is intrahepatic cholestasis. Test of synthetic function is abnormal, commensurate with the severity of liver disease. If the patient's liver disease is bad, the bilirubin albumin will come down and prothrombin will remain abnormal. What is prothrombin? It is vitamin K dependent. I think I have already talked about this, that 80% of your bilirubin is indirect, then it is hemolytic. Okay. Prolonged prothrombin time indicates either vitamin K deficiency due to prolonged jaundice and intestinal malabsorption or significant hepatocellular dysfunction. So that's why all patients with liver disease we give vitamin K for 3 days and then repeat. Why for 3 days and then repeat? Because generally 3 doses of vitamin K will take care of vitamin K deficiency. And after that, ideally we should repeat. And if the prothrombin time becomes abnormal even after vitamin K, it means it was not because of vitamin K deficiency. But vitamin K deficiency or dependent prothrombin time is only in obstructive jaundice. Because whenever there is obstructive jaundice, the absorption of vitamin K from the intestine is lost. So if prothrombin time is abnormal, you suspect severe hepatocellular injury. What will you do? I see a lot of patients in hospitals and ICU. INR is 2, 1.9, 4 FFP, 5 FFP, 6 FFPs are there. Even if there is no bleeding or evidence of coagulopathy, patient of acute hepatitis or patient of dengue with a platelet count of 30,000, bilirubin of 6, SGOT of 2000, INR of 1.9, will you give FFP? No. Indication for giving correction of coagulopathy is only when the INR is between, if the INR is above 3.5 or 2.5 and evidence of bleed. You don't need to correct FFP like this. What is the dose of correction? 125 ml per kilogram body weight, by which you have to give fresh frozen plasma. Because we find it that lot of plasma products are misused because of fear. I know it may be unfounded in small town like this where easily things are not available. This used to happen with platelets, and the same thing is happening with prothrombin time. See, prothrombin time is so user dependent. If the prothrombin time is not properly done, you will get an erroneous result. Don't just rely only on that report. You have to see the patient clinically before you make a judgment about treating that abnormal prothrombin time. What prothrombin time does, it indicates coagulopathy of all liver dependent coagulation factor. And what is PTTK? Partial thromboplastin time determines non-liver dependent coagulation factors. If PTTK is abnormal, How will you correct the coagulopathy? By giving cryoprecipitate. When PT is abnormal, you give fresh frozen plasma. When PTTK is abnormal, you give cryoprecipitate. What are the conditions where you see PTTK abnormal? Predominantly when patients are on heparin or say warfarin. If they are on warfarin, PT is abnormal. Okay, because warfarin goes through the liver, through the liver dependent, factor 10 dependent coagulation factor. So one has to understand the basic coagulation factor, which is external and internal pathway, that is liver dependent and non-liver dependent coagulation factor pathway. What are the tests to determine that, and how will you correct that deficiency? Okay. This also I think I have talked about AST ALT ratio more than 2. The other conditions are non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, hepatitis C, and Wilson's disease. How? Magnitude of elevation. कितना बढ़ सकता है SGOT SGPT? 10 times above normal in an acute hepatitis. More than 10 times above normal in either say dengue, hemorrhagic fever, severe fulminant hepatic failure, very bad ischemic hepatitis, another condition which we see in ICU. Patient of myocardial infarct was in shock for 3 hours. BP never came up above 80 systolic. And third day the SGOT-PT is 2000. Once in a week I get a call from ICU where enzymes are high. And first thing that I ask is what is the primary condition? How long the patient was in hypotension? 2 hours. Don't do any other test in ischemic hepatitis. Because otherwise patient was pre-morbidly better. Ischemic hepatitis, where because of hypotension, the blood supply to the liver falls. Liver is a phenomenal organ with dual blood supply, one through portal vein, one through hepatic artery. So you can sacrifice one. That's why even with portal vein thrombosis, there is no ischemic disease of the liver. What you get is portal hypertension because of dilated veins around the system, around the perigastric area. So you have varices and gastric and esophageal, but you never get liver failure because of portal hypertension. Portal vein thrombosis per se is a disease in itself. Earlier it used to be home deliveries, umbilical sepsis, and used to have portal. Now, even in hospital deliveries, there is a condition called as portal vein thrombosis. One should look for prothrombotic disorders like protein C proteinase, antiprotein 3, lupus anticoagulation syndrome, or Abla syndrome, antiphospholipid antibody syndrome. Then work on that. But these are conditions. So, liver is a phenomenal organ where you have dual blood supply, and that can take care of most of the liver issues. That's why even 75% of the liver is removed during transplant in live related. The normal person will regrow most of the liver, though not in an anatomical proportion, but across like a ball. That happens. I think chronic liver disease, because of viruses, the enzymes don't go very high. You will have, in hepatitis C, you will hardly see SGOT-PT going above 150 to 100. You will not see beyond that. In hepatitis B, unless he is in a seroconvergent state, you will not see high enzymes. 100, 150, 200, not more than that. You will not see more than 5 times above normal. You will not see that. I was talking about drugs, very, very important. This is a list of investigations or conditions that can cause abnormal liver function. Except veno-occlusive disease, I have seen most of the cases. Only one patient of veno-occlusive disease I have seen in my life. That patient is from Dombivli and is followed up in Vedanta because he needs a transplant, his bilirubin doesn't come down below 20. Talk about mushroom poisoning. This is common in West, but even here I have not seen any mushroom poisoning. Sepsis is another thing that we see quite often. In all ICUs, patient with fever, more than 10 days, 15 days, what is happening, we don't know. Their enzymes are high, 80, 100, bilirubin 3, 2. They don't know whether this is primary liver disease or whether this is a part of sepsis. That's where we are called in. Albumin is low because they are sick for a long time. Get it to be normal. You have to investigate such patient very judiciously before you really label them sepsis induced or something else. The one very long distance running leads to very high bilirubin enzymes because of chronic. Just an enumeration of all the conditions which cause this. Never forget thyroid disorders, because we see hypothyroidism very commonly. Very common. So most of these patients may have slightly abnormal LFT, not necessarily because of primary liver disease, but because of hypothyroidism. I already talked to you how will you confirm that the alkaline phosphatase comes from. It comes from by doing gamma GT. If alphos is from the bone, decrease bone turnover seen in osteomalacia, hyperthyroidism, Paget's disease, bone meds. I think I have covered most of this. Any questions that you want to ask me about extrahepatic obstruction? I said ultrasound is a very good test to determine whether this is obstruction or not. Even in AIDS, whenever you are suspecting AIDS cholangiopathy, only condition where ultrasound may not pick up is primary sclerosing cholangitis, where you may have small strictures in the intrahepatic system and CBD may be normal. So that is where I think an MRCP or a CT will help in patients who diagnose primary sclerosing cholangitis. Okay. Intrahepatic cholestasis, virus is another thing, and benign cholestasis of pregnancy. I have 4 mothers who are recurrent intrahepatic cholestasis of pregnancy. Every pregnancy, they have severe itching, increasing alpha, bilirubin. As soon as they deliver, everything is normal. But that 9 months are horror for them. They have to use their comb to itch. So much of itching. It's a very serious illness. I mean, one patient we had to do early cesarean section just for itching. Just for itching. In primary biliary cirrhosis, fatigue and itching is an indication for transplant. It is an exception to MED score. In primary biliary cirrhosis, if the patient has got extreme fatigue and tremendous itching, even if the MED score is good, they are put ahead in the transplant list. It's an exception to MED score. So one has to understand that these are serious issues that need to be addressed. How will you treat? This is just the same thing put in a tabular form. Isolated gamma GT elevation, pancreatic disease, myocardial infarct, renal failure, COPD, diabetes, alcoholism, people who are taking phenytoin, barbiturates. So if only GGT is high, besides alcohol, there are so many other things. So just don't jump to conclusion that this is alcoholic liver disease. Because we are taught that gamma GT high means alcohol. If he is saying that he doesn't take alcohol, he is denying it. So just keep this in mind. That's why this slide, isolated gamma GT high, it's a sensitive indicator of hepatobiliary disease, but it is useful and is limited by lack of specificity. Any questions that you would like to ask?
Sir, thalassemia patient has repeated advantage in that?
No, thalassemia patients have repeated jaundice because of blood transfusion that they get, and secondly because of this transfusion, not HAL minor, major. HAL major patients because of hepatitis C and B, and because of repeated blood transfusion they develop jaundice.
When we ask for liver function test, usually this refined nucleotides and this is not included.
Not that.
So it is them, are they cost
Sir,
effective?
see, I can tell you, it is not cost effective. You first do, I do SGOT, SGPT, bilirubin, alphos and albumin. Okay. If this, I am not able to make a diagnosis on CBC, his clinical background and this, I may ask for gamma GT. I may ask for 5' nucleotides. Otherwise, as a pattern, I don't think so we need to ask for 5' nucleotides and gamma GT. But if you ask for SMA12, that is included. 5' may not be included, but gamma GT is included.
But the normal range what you mentioned, it is not given in any of those laboratory. Even SRL also is, I think, is not.
Sir, everybody has got a different standard reference range. But what is followed by Indian Association for Study of Liver, INSL, this is the standard. Now you will see all societies coming out with their own country-specific recommendations. IBS, IBD, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, all these INSL has started giving recommendations. It will come up on the website. At least it is there circulated among the gastroenterologists. Because there is a national task force of trying to create our own database and Indian specific recommendations. Like we have American ASND guidelines for FC, we have ASND guidelines for NAFLD. Similarly, we will have an INSL guidelines for India specific.
In one case of viral hepatitis, the enzyme levels are high. What is the maximum safety dose of paracetamol can be given for as an antipyretic?
It remains the same for a non-hepatitis patient. 8 grams is toxic in a day. So you can give up to 1.5 gram per day. It is having fever. No problem.
This versus nimesulide is a safety.
No. Nimesulide I would not take. Yeah, it is here. Nimesulide. It means it is, even WHO said no. Forget US FDA. US FDA is very strict. WHO said no. You know, in America, Domstal is not available. They have to go to Canada to buy Domstal. Because of cardiac events in Domperidone, US FDA is not approved it. And we use so much. No, I think what we need as a doctor ourselves, we should rationalize things ourselves. This patient will not do it. We only have to teach our patient and rationalize things because it is only helping us prevent problems.
Sir, in acute viral hepatitis, can we use mild dose of paracetamol?
Yes, that's what I said. That's what I said.
Sir, after cholecystitis, what advice would be given to the patient?
No advice. You are not.
With everyone.
What do you expect after cholecystitis?
Short
Why people are advised that your digestion will go and random problems and why? How many percentage of patients develop this? And what are the scientific complications? See, I tell you what is the role of gallbladder? Now we'll go to basics. What is the role of gallbladder?
Just a reservoir.
It's a reservoir. It is a reservoir containing 50 ml of bile. Why do you need a reservoir? Because human beings have a tendency of eating any time. You eat at 5 a.m. in the morning and suddenly at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. In between you will not. So whenever you take a meal, you need immediate bile for fat digestion. So that is released by the gallbladder. Okay, that's the function. When will the stones form? When gallbladder doesn't function. So you should tell the patient, your gallbladder is diseased, that's why stones are formed. They are there to trouble you. So So you should get it out. Now, why I am talking, why all these? Because now surgery is safe before complications develop. 4% of patients develop pancreatitis, of which 1% of patients will die or a simple gallstone. And we see this day in and day out. I see this every day in, day out. So you should advise, except in diabetic patients, because there are studies. See, I am not saying it on my own. There are studies, there are recommendations. Except in diabetic patients, asymptomatic gallstone in diabetic patients, you should not ask for surgery unless they develop biliary biliary. Otherwise, in all patients, you should advise, unless there are contraindications for surgery. What will happen after cholecystectomy? Now the question that is asked is, you have a reservoir, now that is gone, how the body will respond? Uska bhi study hai. What actually happens is the bile from the liver comes into the small intestine after a meal, either through the gallbladder or directly from the liver into the gallbladder. This bile, after digestion, is taken up once again from the terminal ileum and it goes into once again to the liver. It's called as enterohepatic circulation. This cycle happens around 12 to 14 times in 24 hours in every human body. When the gallbladder goes down, gallbladder is out, this enterohepatic circulation goes to 22 to 25 times. So this liver takes over the function. That's the beauty of our human body. So the liver increases the enterohepatic circulation and the bile is readily available whenever you need it. Only because of excessive enterohepatic circulation, 5 to 10% of patients will develop diarrhea, which is called as bile acid diarrhea. And how will you treat this patient? Cholesterol. But one has to rule out, I have not seen a single case in my last so many years of practice of bile acid diarrhea. So, it is not so common. Gallbladder disease per se is life threatening, I would say. So, I think you should not say that ठीक है चलता है. Convince them asymptomatic gallstone, no risk factors, go for lateral cystectomy because it is safe, it is easy. Do it before complication develop. Because CVD stone, you see so many. You have to deal with cholangitis, pancreatitis, do ERCP, migrated stents, complications of ERCP induced pancreatitis, perforation. I have seen so many. I deal with that, so I know how bad it is. For a person to suffer, I had a lady of 70 years bedridden because of a hip fracture, ISD, gallstones, high risk, relative refused, developed cholangitis. So this CVD stone came down. So I had to do a ERCP. Anesthetist did not give me in 20 minutes time. I just put in a stent. There was a big stone. Patient was all right. 3 years did not. Stent got blocked. She came back with another cholangitis. So I repeated the ERCP, but patient was in a very serious condition. So this time we removed the stent, cleared the CVD, put another stent, and told her, now you take the risk and get rid of gallstone. Didn't do anything. 5 years. 5 years later, she came with pain. It was once again cholangitis. I put in a scope, the stent had migrated into the liver. I put another stent so that bile is drained, and then the patient underwent surgery. So this could have done 10 years back. Now the wound is not healing, patient is bedridden. So these complications we can avoid provided we are convinced that this patient needs and should be done. So that conviction has to come from us to the patient, because complications are very serious. Which one patient out of 10 will get a very bad complication, but he has got a risk of dying. So this one should take care before when we advise the patient. Let the patient decide, no, I will not operate. But your advice should be convincing.
Is there any age limit?
No age limit. 100-year-old patient, I did a laparolysis patient. 100-year-old. Went home. So no age limit. There could be risk factors. But there is no age limit. Old patient with severe cholecystitis, what will you do? If they are unfit, we do cholecystoscopy. USG guided, we drain, put in a pigtail into the gallbladder and drain all the pus. We have done cholecystoscopy.
So issue the liver function test may not reflect the serious damage it caused the liver also sometimes. As per the new software that comes out, they pick up early fibrosis of liver, fibrosis. Are they sensitive enough to?
It will only pick up fibrosis. See, why fibroscan came in? See, fibroscan have a different, it's called as RP method, which is done by sonologist. And there is a machine called fibroscan. Okay. Fibroscan machine is come from Sweden, costs 70 lakhs.
So everything only nobody is doing it.
Even at my clinic, once a month we get the machine on hire. Dr. Lakshmikant is doing, but that is RP. That is through ultrasound. So what it will detect is only fibrosis. Why do you need to know fibrosis? When you have to take a decision about treatment. In NFLD, fibrosis is there. What are you going to tell the patient? Or exercise karo, or vajan kam karo. You are creating fear in the patient. That's the thing. This was done to detect hepatitis B and hepatitis C when no other tests were available to determine treatment protocol. In hepatitis B, the recommendation are ASLD guidelines are age above 40. Okay. Enzymes 2 times above normal, E antigen positive or E antigen negative. E antigen positive, HBV DNA more than 20,000, E antigen negative, HBV DNA more than 2,000. Now, what about people between 30 and 40? What about people whose enzymes are 1.5 times above normal? What about people who have got hepatitis B at the age of 4 years and now become 30 years of age and develop chronic liver disease? These questions were not answered by the guidelines. That's why this fibroscan came in to pick up early fibrosis so that we start treatment. Antivirals are started. As of now, except entecavir and tenofovir, no antiviral has shown to reverse fibrosis. In hepatitis C also the same thing. Peginterferon was so toxic a drug with ribavirin that people were not willing to start. So look at fibrosis before starting. Compensated and decompensated liver disease, it was contraindicated. So that was the indication by which we wanted to know. That's why fibroscan came in to start therapy. But now fibroscan is so expensive to do and it creates fear in mind because it is not 100%. In obese patient it may not give a correct idea. So fibrosis, I take it with a pinch of salt. I do it in a patient of say hepatitis B. A family member has got hepatitis B already on treatment. He is 25 years old and he's got hepatitis B virus positive, enzymes are normal, his viral load is 2 crores. But enzymes are normal. I have to take a decision whether to start treatment or not. Because he's already seen one liver disease going in the home. This is the time I do a fibrosis. If the fibroscan shows F3, F4 fibrosis, I will start treatment. If it is F2, I will repeat fibroscan every 6 months. Earlier we used to do liver biopsy. Liver biopsy is not without risk. So, fibroscan.
What it was doing.
Antiviral will start with B and hepatitis C. So viral load is depends on the starting of medicine.
No sir, there are so many factors. I said, the first factor is there has to be chronic hepatitis. Age above 40. Chronic hepatitis defined by SGPT 2 times above normal. That means you have 2 readings 6 months apart. For definition of chronic hepatitis, chronic means 6 months duration. if you have one SGPT of 70 and in 1 month's time it is 60 and after 1 month it is 30, I will not start this patient unless he's got cirrhosis evidence. So this patient, if January his SGPT is 100, in June it is 200, he is 40 years, E antigen positive, viral load more than 20,000, then I will start. Why so many criteria? Because today there are no better drugs for hepatitis. Hepatitis B, if you start antiviral, it is lifelong. And after 5 years, the resistance to antiviral fortunately is 2 to 8%. But what happens to those patients who are resistant? That is why these are stringent criteria of selection of patients where you will start. Because you want to benefit them, not harm them. If the patient develops resistance, he will develop acute liver injury and he can die. So you are, what actually happens by giving antiviral? You are killing the wild virus and the mutant virus increases. When the mutant increases, you will develop severe liver disease. So don't छेड़ोफाई, वो सांप को छेड़ो मत जब तक वो तकलीफ नहीं देता. That is why, unless if we find some better treatment which will clear the virus from the bone marrow, from the tissues, from the blood, then probably you can justify in every patient. But not now. I know earlier when antibody was available, so many patients were given. And then rationalization came in. No, you don't have to give, stop it. So that's it.
So please tell about this fatty liver.
I think we have another lecture. Fatty liver disease is a major problem, especially for normal individuals, especially for high risk individuals with diabetes and all syndrome X, hyperlipidemia, obesity, insulin resistance, insulin hypersensitivity. All it's a completely different topic.
एक बार में और 4 बार रखेंगे.
Yes. Fatty liver is reversible provided you lose 10% of your body weight. No medication available today to reverse. Lot of drugs are there, but nothing has helped. You have to treat the risk factor. If there is hypertriglyceridemia, correct it. If there is hyperinsulinemia, correct that. If there is obesity, correct that. Then but there is a new concept in fatty liver disease. I think we discussed that. So it's a new, completely new concept of research. It started in 1998. WHO had given task force to the topmost 12 scientists of the world. 14 challenges were given in 1998 regarding some diseases. After 12 years, these people came out with some answers. Of these 12, 4 are Indian origin. Indian origin, not from India. Indian origin, all American. So I think we will discuss it is all in our food rather than anything else. Thank you. Thank you very much.